Ameen, welcome to DAO Talk. Thanks so much for making the time to join me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, maybe you can get us started by telling me a little bit about your background. I know you have a long history in the space. Could probably go for like hours on that, but maybe just a brief overview of your background and kind of like how you're involved in DAOs and governance today.
Yeah, cool. I got started in Ethereum in 2016, worked for Consensus for a year, left to start SpankChain in 2017, helped start MolochDAO, launched that in 2018, started working on Rye stablecoins, a fork of DAI in 2019. We shipped it to mainnet 2020. Also was involved in helping set up Metacartel Ventures and the DAO, which were the first like legal. They had a corporate tie-in to the DAO. So it's like a DAO-backed company or something, maybe company-backed DAO. I don't know exactly, but they were some of the first like for-profit venture investing DAOs. Mostly these days focusing on Reflexer, Rye, and some SpankChain stuff.
Cool. A man of many projects over time. Would love to hear your thoughts on governance for Rye and Reflexer specifically. I know that, like, I've seen you talk about the concept of ungovernance. I know you guys use Tally, but maybe in a little bit of a different way than your standard compound governor Bravo project. So just like would love to hear you go off on that. Like, how do you think about governance for Rye and just governance in general?
Sure. So thinking about governance, I've been thinking about it for a while. There's like for Rye specifically, we like ungovernance. This was sort of a reaction to us observing that many people in the space were going all in on governance and governance coins and governance control and a lot of that. So we decided to call our governance, which works the same as pretty much anybody else's governance, ungovernance. We decided to call it that as a meme, as a sort of memetic filter to filter out everybody who is too excited about governing things. Because the idea of ungovernance for Rye is to progressively remove our ability to change the protocol. This has to be executed carefully. You don't want to remove a bunch of the, your ability to set the protocol parameters before you know that they're, mostly correct. So it's been a several year process so far. It will continue for, a couple more years. But the goal is to progressively decentralize, to progressively remove the governance control over the system. We see governance as somewhat of a liability in that sense.
Absolutely. I think too much governance, I've definitely seen it add risk to protocols. It also, maybe to your point about the meme, like it attracts people who maybe are more excited about bureaucracy or just like trying to create an income for themselves, more like, taking more of a cynical look at it. So totally hear where you're coming from there.
You have to be
what are the kinds of things?
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say the bureaucracy will expand to meet the needs of the expanding bureaucracy. So unless you very carefully try to steer away from that, you end up there.
No doubt. So what are the kinds of things that you are using governance for today for Rye? And then kind of how do you what's the path towards removing the need for that type of activity?
Yeah. So the things that governance has already removed control over is some of the major contracts, we can't add more collateral to Rye, which has advantages and disadvantages, right? Maybe there's other collaterals we might want to add, but fortunately we never have to have those conversations ever again, because we can't change it. Things that we have yet to ungovern are the controller parameters. We're still working on that. We're still gathering data. We're seeing how the market responds, and we're still tuning the controller. That will probably stay more ungoverned for some time. Another example is the oracles. it is hard to set up your oracles in such a way that they are always, you could rely on them indefinitely. So far we use like Chainlink oracles, but maybe one day Chainlink is subject to US sanctions or something and like has to stop providing data to your protocol. And so your protocol, might behoove itself to have a backup plan. Or have the ability to change oracles. And then even if you pick decentralized oracles, something like Uniswap v3, well, maybe in 10 years, Uniswap v6 is where the liquidity is at. And so you might still need to point your oracle to that price feed instead of the previous one. And so that's a thing that you might always want to have some amount of control over. Now, for us, on governance means like thinking strategically about that kind of thing. And so for the oracle example, it's like a governed thing. Like governance can add oracles to a whitelist where they can be switched to quickly, but the process of adding oracles to a whitelist is slow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those are actually 3 great examples. And if it's cool with you, I kind of want to dig into each one a little bit. So first, what you've already removed, the ability to add collateral. So I know this kind of relates to some of the challenges we've seen with like censorship and different more like IRL, non-crypto, more permissioned asset types. So like, talk me through that. Like, what kind of drove you towards that decision? How does it differentiate Rye? What do you think about not, adding other collateral types in general, maybe even outside of Rye?
Yeah, it's a good place to start. So I've been dealing with collateral issues for a while. So when I was designing MolochDAO and MolochDAO version 2, a big thing that we were thinking about was like, okay, this is a thing that holds a bunch of tokens. What happens if one of those tokens is frozen? Like when I rage quit, which is a way of claiming my proportional share of the treasury in a MolochDAO, and then exiting, that function will loop over all of the tokens in the treasury and send them to me. So if one of the tokens is blacklisted, either me or the contract itself, that function can't run. And so we had to make like a backup function that's like a safe rage quit. And then you can provide the list of tokens and then it'll loop over that, safer list because one of those tokens may not, allow you. And then you can still recover the rest of the funds, even if a single token is frozen, right? Now, most people haven't been thinking about freezing tokens in contracts. One of the big reasons why we made Rye in the first place was because we didn't like the direction that, made Rye in the first place is we didn't like the direction that DAI was going in. So around March of 2020, or I don't remember exactly, it was Black Thursday, Maker basically had some trouble. DeFi summer happened, that like a lot of factors made it so that there's a lot of demand for DAI. And they decided to add USDC as collateral. They didn't think that was going to be that big of a deal then. It also wasn't the majority of the collateral then. And no one had ever frozen the USDC collateral in a smart contract yet. Fast forward to today, and we are discussing the risk of USDC and DAI being frozen and what would DAI do about it and how could DAI protect itself. And one of the suggestions is like, well, maybe we could implement negative rates at work like Rye. So from a collateral perspective, like, DAI has now inherited the governance of USDC. USDC is a US corporation. It has a corporate governance board. They make decisions, and then that those trickle down into like USDC deciding to blacklist certain addresses or not. Or choosing like which forks to redeem on, sort of whole other conversation. But that's a thing you have to think about now. And so the motivation for something like Rye is to try and have a type of stablecoin that could be predictably used for a longer period of time that doesn't have counterparty risk baked in. Because Rye is only backed by Ether, operates on the Ethereum network, presumably, so long as the Ethereum network is running, it will continue to work, at least from a collateral perspective, right? Rye has its own risks, but we try to mitigate those risks as much as possible to inherit as much of the moneyness of Ether that we can.
That makes a lot of sense. So, if you're DAI, you're probably inheriting some of the risk of Ethereum, as well as like the MakerDAO related risk, protocol risk, and the risk of USDC, or just like parameters governance of USDC. Whereas with Rai, you've kind of reduced it down to the risk of Ethereum and Ether, the asset, as well as the just like the Reflexer, the Rai protocol. Cool. That's on that note. Would love to transition to the next thing you brought up, which is parameters. So like that's something that you still need governance around. So I'm not exactly like a control theory gigabrain, and a lot of our listeners probably aren't either. So maybe you can just like tell me a little bit like what are the parameters that you're looking at with Rai, and like what kinds of adjustments do you anticipate potentially needing to make over time with governance?
Yeah, so I'll give a brief overview of how the system works and is different from DAI. The main thing that sets Rai apart from something like DAI is that Rai does not have a fixed $1 peg. It allows the peg to float in a controlled way, and it uses the peg to incentivize certain behavior to stabilize the system. Let me explain how DAI achieves stability for a second, and then I'll explain how Rai achieves stability. So, for example, historically, the price of DAI is supposed to be $1, but it could drop below. When it drops below, what the MakerDAO people do is they have meetings, and the output of this meeting is an interest rate that they charge, a stability fee that they now charge to DAI borrowers. And the idea is that by charging a higher and higher stability fee, DAI borrowers will, eventually decide to buy their DAI back and pay back their debt, which will bring the price of DAI back up to the peg, and then the protocol will have stabilized around $1. This has been tested. It's worked in practice. They did this a couple times. No real problems there, except that it's kind of annoying to have meetings to have to do this. You might think maybe we can automate this somehow. The other side of it is a little trickier. If DAI is above a $1, then the system doesn't really have any great way of incentivizing DAI holders to sell. It can't impose negative rates. And to understand why, it's like they can't really go into everyone's like DAI wallet and like remove DAI from their wallets very easily in a way that would make sense. And that's the only way you can do that if you want to keep it at $1. You say every DAI is worth $1. So if I want to impose negative rates, I have to make you have less DAI, right? And it's kind of similar reason why like central banks don't enforce negative rates, because like I can't turn your $100 bill into like a $99 bill, So what Maker does instead is they added USDC collateral, and that allows people to come in and short DAI against USDC, and that suppresses the price of DAI, and then it stabilizes on the other end. But the cost you pay is that now you have a bunch of USDC in the system, and fast forward to 2020, it's like 70-80% USDC and only 7 or something percent ETH, maybe 15% crypto overall. So there's a lot of USDC now shorting DAI in order to keep the DAI price suppressed. So the way Rai does this is it floats the peg. And so instead of like, in Maker where you can't set negative rates, Rai just says, hey, this Rai that used to be, instead of $1, we started at 3.14, but, same concept, sort of arbitrary starting point. It'll say, Rai is now less than $3.14. Rai is now $3.13 in terms of borrowing it, liquidating it, all of that. And so it creates this incentive where now if the price, it's the peg price, right? The redemption price is what we call it. So if the peg price, redemption price is falling, I'm a Rai holder. I'm like, oh snap! Like, in the future, Rai is going to be worth less money, so I should sell. Right, so it's a way of incentivizing holders to sell by imposing these negative rates. It's not like a direct rate because you're not having less Rai. We're just claiming, that in the future Rai will be less money, and the protocol enforces that. And it works the same in reverse. If Rai is under its moving, redemption price peg, the rates will be positive, and so that'll incentivize people to pay back their debts, and it'll incentivize people to hold, and that'll bring up the price of Rai to be back to whatever its new peg is. And And that seemed to work so far in practice. And the nice thing about it is we don't have to have meetings. All of this happens on its own on the blockchain using transparently verifiable on-chain math and operates in real time and sets the rates every day.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Super helpful to compare and contrast against DAI. So you mentioned if DAI is going below peg, there's like a meeting where they can change basically like the
stability
interest
fee,
rate. Yeah. What is the equivalent for RAI? Or does that just not present itself because there's this like decreasing price over time?
We fix the stability fee, I think, around 2%. We don't use that as a monetary policy knob to change people's incentives.
Got it. So the main parameter you're adjusting is like the rate that the price of RAI is decreasing over time.
That's right. So we don't actually change the redemption price directly. What we change is the redemption rate, which the redemption rate is shorthand for the rate of change of the redemption price. And so it's expressed as an interest rate, either positive or negative. For example, if it's positive 10% and RAI is $3, then you can expect 1 year from now, the price of RAI will be 3.3% or $3.3, which is 10% higher than $3, right? And if you are borrowing RAI, well, your debt value just grew by 10%. And so it's sort of like losing money, right? Because now you owe more money. And if you're holding RAI, and the redemption price goes up by 10%, you expect to make 10% on your money, because you're holding the RAI and now it's worth more. And so that rate is determined by how much error there is. And so it has two terms. It has a P and an I. P stands for proportional, I stands for integral. It's using a sort of very basic control theory of PID control. It's pretty widespread in industrial use because it uses such simple math that we can even implement it in Solidity and it's not too expensive. The proportional part is just like, if you have a 1% error in this context is like if the market price is above the redemption price, it's like a 1% error, right? It's 3.03 cents, but the peg is $3.3, so it's 1%. So that will result in some amount of error, proportional to or that will result in some amount of rate proportional to the error. So if it's 1%, as it's set up right now, it'll be like a 7% rate. If it's like 2%, then it'll be like a 14% rate, 1-to-1 with how big. And so the idea for that is like, you want the rates to be higher the further you are from the peg. All right, it sort of makes sense. The other term is the integral term, and that one is different. It's more of a correcting RAI over a long time frame. And so that accumulates any price error that might have happened over the last, several months. And so that way it's like, hey, if there is some persistent error that isn't being fixed, then we make the rates even stronger until it gets fixed.
Got it. And maybe this is a bridge to the Oracle part. So, what are you using oracles? Is that to like understand the price relative to $1, or like what are you using oracles for in the protocol?
Yeah, that's right. So we mint RAI against ETH only. So there's two numbers we care about: the ETH price in dollars and the RAI price in ETH, from which we can get the RAI price in dollars. So we need those two price feeds. We use Chainlink for both currently. And we have backups that we're working on to put in place as well. And so we can whitelist them and have options if we need to switch.
Cool. And then to finish it off, what will it take over time to be able to eliminate potentially these governance needs around the parameters and oracles?
Yeah. So I think for the parameters, we need to run it for a while. It's hard to know in advance if your parameters are going to work. And so we changed the P parameter a couple times. We're sort of emulating MakerDAO, which is emulating a controller. Like they're having meetings, like trying to approximate what a controller would do. And we're just like, well, why not put the controller directly in charge? And the reason is like, well, what if you get it wrong? And so it's important to like try to get it mostly right. And like, you know, we want to make it so that the parameters can be ungoverned and for a long time, but it's hard to say like this will work for 10 years without running it for a couple of years first. So it's really about running it, collecting data empirically, and then using that to inform our next moves. Oracles are slightly different. I think oracles we might not even be able to ever fully ungovern because of the stuff I was saying earlier about needing to protect yourself against service provider outages or decentralized AMMs, you know, liquidity migrations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I have a non-governance question about Rye. So I would love to hear your pitch for why someone should use Rye, or what the use cases are, and not in the sense of like contrasting to MakerDAO, because I think we kind of covered that, right? Like it's potentially reduces, you know, various risks. But like, let's pretend Rye is the only option for some kind of like stable asset or contrasting asset to the value of ETH. Like, what are the use cases? Like, why should someone implement or like use Rye or hold it or whatever in their overall crypto activities?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this question in two different ways. I'm going to answer it for like your average person, and then I'm going to answer it for like, you know, in the abstract. So like for your average person, your why Rye is like, it's predictable. Maybe it's not predictable in the sense that like, you know what dollar value it's going to be at all times, but it is predictable in the sense that you know how the rates will respond to the market at all times. And so you can have that sort of guarantee. You know that it's not backed by anything that will surprise you and rug pull. To some extent, you know, the goal of Rye is to make it rug pull resistant money in that sense. So the other thing I would say is that it's honest money. Rye tells you what to do. If the rates are positive, it's telling you to buy it. If the rates are negative, it's telling you to sell it. And that's like a nice feature for a system. And then in the abstract, I would say like, a lot of people, when they first encounter Rye, they go through the following phases. They say, this is weird and it doesn't fit into my mental model of stable coins. I like dollars. Then they get it a little bit more. And then they say, you know, now that I get it a little bit more, I kind of see why they did this way. You know, it might have some niche use case or something, right? And then you learn a little bit more. And then you're like, why doesn't everything work like Rye? Everything should work like Rye. And that's why like Maker is actually like discussing how to impose negative rates. They've realized that they're stuck with all this USDC that they're trying to get out. And Rune is like, hey, you know, we should maybe have negative rates the way Rye does it. And it's like, man, that's a really nice conclusion for you guys to come to after Nikolai was like fired from the company and like, you know, kicked out. So he and I are in the Discord. He's obviously having more fun. He has like 6 years of I told you so's to unleash. But Rye has, you know, was engineered and maintained by schizophrenic degenerates for the last 2 years. And it turned out that, I don't know, it was a good idea to prepare for the outcome of the USDC freezing stuff. And like, maybe I would want to kill myself if Rye didn't exist right now, because the conversation that's going on would be, if Rye didn't exist, it would be a bunch of people sitting around being like, what about negative rates? Maybe we could try that. I don't know how they work. Seems scary, right? And it's like, that conversation doesn't happen because with Rye, it's like, we've proven it. Here's how they work, and you can look at it and, you know, figure it out from there. But if you zoom out even further, like this isn't even about stable coins. Like this is our testing ground, right? Like this is about trying to create credibly neutral money for humanity. This is about trying to figure out if it's even possible, and like if it's possible, like how well can we do it? And so it's about like, can we create a rule set that's transparent? You know, can this transparent rule set be trusted to work for a long time without needing to change it? Can the rule set be backed by money that is, or like collateral that's also credibly neutral and doesn't have counterparty risk, right? If you can do these things, then at the end of it, we get potentially a type of money that more people can coordinate around. So when I think of why Rai, it's like, because I'm interested in the future where we can coordinate around money that isn't controlled by any given entity and is governed by transparent rules on chain that people can rally around, and the control system stuff we have to get right, but it doesn't need to be perfect. Like for Bitcoin, one of the most important things about Bitcoin is the difficulty adjustment, which is a control system. It's moving average, targets 10 minutes, and it makes sure that if like the network, mining power dropped off a cliff all of a sudden, it's recoverable, right? It's not like a very sophisticated system, but it's an important that they have one. It's the reason Bitcoin is resilient. And so I'm hoping that with Rai and Rai-like things, the controller doesn't need to be perfect. It sort of needs to protect against the extreme cases and mostly drive stability and ideally be well understood by the participants, because they sort of fill in the gaps in the control loop, and they, know based on their predictions of how the controller is going to work, what they need to do today to stabilize the system. It would be nice if the Fed worked like Rai. If they gave us, projected rates by algorithm, and the algorithm told us, like, here are the rates that will change instantly if the inflation corrects tomorrow, and here are the rates that are sticky. And then you could make better long-term projections about, your mortgage and whatever you want to do.
I love all of that. Yeah, and instead we're like, is he frowning when he goes into the Jackson Hole Convention Center? Or is he smiling?
Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah.
The more I learn about central banking, the more I'm like, oh my God. Anyways, we can wrap up if you want.
I feel the same way. No. I feel the same way. I actually have one more question that's kind of me indulging myself, but like,
do it.
If ETH is, let's fast forward like 20 years, and like ETH is like actually used for all these like non-speculative use cases, and it's like the main like medium of exchange for like international business, blah blah blah, whatever like the crazy success case for ETH is, and that means ETH is money. What role is Rai playing? Let's assume Rai is also maximally successful in that world. Like, what role is Rai playing that ETH doesn't play? Like, help me understand that.
No matter what, you'll still have volatility in ETH, right? You still have volatility in gold, and you can still reduce the volatility by slowing it down, by holding it, well, Rai is dollar denominated, right? So it has an interest rate that's expressed in dollar terms, and so it can deviate from the dollar, but it does so gradually. And so insofar as in that future, dollars are still a stable-ish reference asset, then, Rai will work off of that to achieve its own stability. In the far future, if you like, well, I guess to answer your question specifically, like Rai might be like a sort of LIBOR rate. That's what I was saying, is like the interbank lending rate is determined by like what the rates on Rai are, or something like that, because that's the the rate that you have to. If it's negative, you're paying the ETH holders to mint the Rai, and if it's positive, the ETH holders are basically paying to mint it because the Rai is so useful that they want it for something else. And so it can be thought of as a, in competitive equilibrium with all of the other sort of ETH rates, like stETH and so forth. I don't really know exactly.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting.
No, all of that makes a lot of sense to me. One thought that I just had is like, ETH is still in that world going to be a commodity that has a lot of puts and calls on supply and demand of ETH for all the different reasons it's used. It's really not designed to be stable in any way, in the way that Rai is, and in the same way that the US dollar is. So anyway, everything you said makes sense to me, and that's like one way that I can kind of like frame it for myself in my head. I actually have one more question. Sorry about Rye. I've been very curious about Rye, and this, and I think a lot of people probably are too, just like having seen the headlines recently. How do I get it? So without having to do like chain sleuthing and research, like give me the I'm just a regular user. Like, what are the 2 to 3 steps I should take this week to like adopt Rye and start using it right now?
Yeah. So I wouldn't recommend holding Rye right now because the rates are negative. So the controller wants you to sell Rye. The rates as of right now are, let's find out. Stats.reflexer.finance, negative 15, almost 16%. So if you're holding Rye right now, you should be expecting to lose some money over time. Now, if you're shorting Rye, that's fun to do. So the way to short Rye is to deposit ETH in Reflexer. So you have to either have a delta neutral, you borrow the ETH against something else, or you are into ETH, you want to hold some ETH, you have some extra ETH sitting around, you deposit it in the Reflexer protocol, you can go to reflexer.finance, and then you can mint some Rye. And because the rates are negative, your debt will shrink, and so you can sell the Rye for anything else, like DAI. This is how I short it. This is how Vitalik shorts it. Everybody shorts it. So you sell it for something else, and then you wait, and when you wait, your debt will shrink, and then later you can buy Rye, and it should be in expectation cheaper, and then you can make money by the arbitrage. So that's how you sort of arbitrage Rye. When the rates are negative, it's asking you to supply it to the market. So that's what you could get paid to do today. You can also take advantage of some of our liquidity incentives on the app. You'll see on app.reflexer.com, there's a section called incentives. And so you can LP the Rye and DAI in Uniswap v3 or on Rye and 3 pool and Curve or Rye ETH on Uniswap. All of those have some sort of incentives in our ungovernance token FLX.
You heard the man. Go short some Rye. I love it.
Yeah,
that sounds like fun. I'm gonna go check it out. Cool.
Thanks.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate your breakdown of Reflexer, your thoughts on governance as it relates to Rye in particular. If it's cool with you, I want to transition to some closing questions. The first one is a 2-parter. So what's your favorite part of working on SpankChain, on Reflexer, just like working in the space in general? And then the flip side, like what's your least favorite part or something you think you wish would change about the space?
Least favorite part comes to mind a little faster. It's being a U.S. citizen. It's really easy. A lot of restrictions around being a burger, and I would wish that the U.S. stops being so restrictive and like figures out all its rules to be more friendly, because it's pretty annoying. Best part is probably, I don't know, not many people get to work on this stuff. If I lived 50 years ago and I wanted to like theorize about monetary policy, I'd have to like write a paper and get it peer reviewed or something. It's pretty cool to be able to try out this stuff in prod and use this to learn. By making Rye, a little central bank in a box like a toy, you can sort of see it. It's more easily understandable. And then you can compare that, which you've created from first principles, to like how a central bank works today. And you're like, what monstrosity have you wrought? Like, how did you get here? Like, what is the sequence of events? If you try to describe the like dollar in shitcoin terms, you're like, wait, you told everyone it was going to be backed, and then you rug pulled the collateral, and you're like, what? It's like, you can't even like it doesn't even make sense. So probably the best part of working on stuff like Rye is like being able to learn more about how things work. And I regret to inform everyone that the more I learn about how things work, the more angry I get. Because I think I started out with like 20 with, I was like, we should save the world, right? And I get to 30 and you're like, the police are really bad. I'm a lot more aggressive about these types of things. And so, yeah, that's probably the greatest opportunity, is the ability to just learn this stuff a little bit better and not at the learn from the bankers who are incentivized to lie and gaslight you about everything.
Imagine trying to like climb the ladder at the Fed till you got to be Jerome Powell, I know I can tell you right now I wouldn't make it.
Yeah, that sounds like oh man, I've tried to engineer my career in crypto to avoid paperwork. SpankChain, adult industry, fairly unregulated. MolochDAO is like a nonprofit. Nobody signed anything. Jurisdiction was Ethereum, right? Metacartel Ventures and stuff. Yeah, we had to have some like legal backing, but the corporate, bylaws are like defer to the code, for what the balances should be, and stuff like that. So we try to avoid this. That seems like the most possible paperwork you'd ever have to do. It's like, yeah, it doesn't even make sense. Like, you learn about central banking, you go through a couple phases too. You're like, oh, they set the interest rates. You know what? I have opinions. Maybe they should set the interest rates better, right? They shouldn't be so laggy. And that's like your like level 1 of learning how they work. And then you get to like level 2 and you're like, oh, they're not even changing the right rates. They should pick like some external reference. Like, why don't we have any external reference asset? Like, what is going on here? And then you get to level 3 and you're like, Jesus fucking Christ, this whole thing is a Ponzi scheme. Like none of, like, everything above that is like a distraction, So anyway, that's how I feel today. It's very rewarding to be able to work on Rye stuff and try to pull ourselves out of the dark ages of central banking, which we are still in.
Yeah, I love it. What, to your point, like, where else would you get to just
you learn this stuff?
Like, be like, I'm gonna make my own central bank. That's such a ridiculous statement, but like, you did do that. Like, you actually did. It's pretty good.
And I think we're gonna make a lot more. So excited for that.
Yeah, it's easy to get upset about crypto sometimes when you look at some of the things people create and you're like, okay, that's a ridiculous Ponzi, blah, blah, blah. But on the flip side, it's cool that we can all make Ponzi's that we think are going to work. I think there's something beautiful about that. Hopefully over time we like learn and become better intentioned over time. But like, it is amazing that we can all just like create these things and see if they work or not.
Yeah. I've been in DAOs for a long time. MolochDAO is like the 3rd or 4th DAO. So like when I was making MolochDAO, it was like me and like the 5 people who gave a shit, coordination junkies. We were all absolutely convinced in the like coordination potential that we could unlock if we only made DAOs cool and like figured out how to set up governance and like not get hacked, like the DAO was, and like recovered the PTS DAO and blah, 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 blah. And we sounded insane to everyone because we were like, yes, there's 10 DAOs this year. Next year, there will be 100 DAOs. And then there will be thousands of DAOs. And we were like, as high conviction as you can be, right? We knew we sounded like crazy. But like, fast forward to today, and there's a DAO for everything. And we've only just, I think, crossed the, we're at the cusp or cross the chasm or whatever, right? There will, we're not putting DAOs back in the box. There will be lots more DAOs. We were right. And it's really cool to see people coming around, and it'll take years for people to come around to the idea that like, you don't need to necessarily peg to something to have stability. You can set rates without, in reference to something else. You can automate the rate setting. And these are all like good properties that you want in your money system. And I'm hoping that this will first happen in DeFi, with Maker, with Rye, with other systems that'll come after. And then once we have these in place and scale them up, then we have a stronger argument to make to the rest of the world. It's not theoretical that we can demonstrate the utility of these systems and maybe slay some Moloch, advance human coordination and get people using money systems that they can trust together.
Let's fucking do it. All right. I have one more question for you, which isn't crypto related, but it can be if you want to, which is, what is your favorite place in the world and why?
Right now, my house. It's not a very good answer. My favorite place in the world is like ETH hackathons. I think that's like what I miss the most over COVID. People are like, what do you miss? like my ETH conferences that I used to go to. Those are fun. Yeah, I like this. I don't know. Maybe not a great answer.
No, it's a great answer. I mean, home is nice, and just from Twitter, your house seems like fun. Yeah, and there's something very special about like working online with all these people, you know, and then you like get together. It's very fun. I'm going to MCon for the first time in a couple of weeks.
Oh, sweet. I'll see you there.
Super stoked for it. Hell yeah. I keep seeing like people I know from the internet getting added to the Telegram chat. And I'm like, God, this is going to be great. So
yeah,
I totally hear you.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah. Thanks for all your work on Tally and stuff too. I just submitted my first Reflexer governance proposal today. I do some payroll. So yeah, it was exciting stuff. We have a slight adaptation of your governor contract, so you can't create proposals from the UI. I will beg you to let us, help you build that feature if you want. We'll sign NDAs. This is my last minute plug.
Is it a fork of governor, or is it a different framework entirely?
No, we actually use Governor Bravo. We just have like a different executor. So it doesn't execute using the same time lock. So we have to propose things slightly differently. Everything else on the UI works, which is really nice of Tally. Like all the proposals show up, the voting works great. So great product. Excited to see it.
Yeah, thanks, Ameen. We really want people to create proposals on Tally. So I'll tell our product people, Raph and Adrian, were very excited that I was interviewing you. So I'll tell them that was your parting message.
Sweet.
Thank you for Tally,
so much.
But also, what if I could create proposals on it?
Yeah, I did have to do some GitHub code, generate the payload and scripts. So
cool. Yeah, no, that's dope. I'll definitely tell the team. Well, thanks, Ameen. I know I learned a ton from this, and we'll publish it soon, like in the next couple of weeks. Let me know if there's any particular time that you think it would be good to publish it. But otherwise, it'll be in the next 2 to 3 weeks at the most.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time. It's great talking to you.
And yeah, likewise. I'll see you at MCon. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, see you at MCon.